Good evening and welcome back here on Italian Military Archives and to another QUARTERDECK live show. So, for those of you who are not familiar with this show, how is this going to work? I will be answering your questions that came through a post that I made a few weeks ago, and then there will be a few time for a live Q&A segment. If you haven't checked the previous QUARTERDECK live, you can find it on the channel. So I recommend it to you. And remember that in the description, you find the timestamps to the different chapters or to the different segments where I answered the specific question. So you can jump from a question to another. And it will be the same for this one. I remember that you can also support the channel by becoming a member. You can press the join button, and these are the items, features that come with the channel membership. For those of you that can become a member now, I can tell you that there is a video in preview about the never completed battleship Impero, the fourth ship in the Littorio class. So I can recommend this to you. It will be anyway become available in the coming days for all the simple subscribers. So coming to the first question, it's not about World War II, it's about the very start of the Italian unification and the history of the Regia Marina. So what was the naval strength at the time of the Italian unification? So Italy became a unified country on the 17th of March, 1861. It's the day when the parliament ratified the unification of the country, and the country truly became the Kingdom of Italy. Actually, there was already a decree dating back to November 1860 that, let's say, ruled the merge of the navies belonging to the pre-unification states. So in a way, you can argue that the Regia Marina was born before the Kingdom of Italy. So that's quite interesting. This is a snapshot on the strength of the Regia Marina on the day of the unification. There was one ship of the line, the Regalantuomo. It was a ship of the line of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Was called Monarca at the time, and then it was renamed Regalantuomo. And it was the only ship of the line that the Regia Marina had, and the only one that we'll eventually have, because we are in a period when the construction of ironclads has already started, and ship of the line will become increasingly out of fashion, let's say. Then there were 5 frigates, 8 gunboats, 2 corvettes, and 2 scouts. I'm talking about propeller-driven ships, because at this time, you know, there are different technologies all living together at the same time. In fact, we switched to the other rectangular, where we find the paddle-driven ships that were in service, and you still find a lot of units, 11 frigates, 7 corvettes, 9 transports, 8 scouts, and 6 tugs. And then there was also a recollection of more than a dozen ships, purely sail ships, so without any kind of propulsion except for the wind itself. So hello everybody. I see many friends in the sidebar. So welcome everybody. At this time, there were already some ships with included the armor protection under construction. Here is the Principe di Carignano. This was the first ironclad, although the hull was made by wood, and then it was covered by armor plates. But this is generally recognized as the first armored ship of the Regia Marina. And then you had other frigates that came later, and at this time you have also 2 corvettes that also, the Terribile and Formidabile, that will fight at the Battle of Lissa. Actually, I have to say that I have a video in English about the Battle of Lissa and the campaign that led to the battle, which is still in my main channel in Italian. I couldn't move it here because I have to do a re-editing of the video due to a copyright issue of the music that for some reason is spotted in the English channel but not on the Italian channel. So for those of you that are interested in this battle, you can go to the Italian channel and browse Battle of Lissa among the videos, and you will find it. Okay, we can move to the second question. I recently bought a war game, Beneath the Med, which is a war game that I know, but I never had the chance to play it. It's about the Italian submarine force in World War II, and there is some mention of the Italian Navy submarines operating in the Red Sea. Do you know anything about that? Of course, yes. I think the Red Sea flotilla argument came up in one of the previous Q&As. Although today I want to focus on the submarines that operated in the Red Sea. As we know, the Italian held the colonies of Eritrea, Somaliland, Italian Somaliland, and later Ethiopia, and especially in the coast of Eritrea, there was the port of Massawa, who was the main Italian naval base in the Red Sea. True, it was isolated from the Mediterranean because the British eventually controlled Suez, but still it posed a decent threat to the navigation in the Red Sea because there were submarines and surface ships there. So this meant that the Royal Navy had to devote a good chunk of warship to escorting convoys bound for the Middle East. This is the breakdown of the submarine flotilla based there. 8 submarines, 7 of them were ocean-going submarines. One, the Perla, was a smaller type submarine that was considered the coastal submarine, let's say, one of those that you would eventually find quite easy in the Mediterranean. 8 submarines divided in 4 squadrons that were operational, and that already at the start of the hostilities, they had their orders to deploy in specific ambush zones inside the Red Sea, but also right outside in the Gulf of Oman, in front of Djibouti, which at the time was a French colony, also nearby Yemen, who at the time was controlled by the British. Here's a zoom on this map. You can see some of them, like the Torricelli and the Torricelli and Pera, who were destined to carry out ambush here in front of Djibouti, while the Galilei was destined more to the Gulf of Oman. Sorry, not Gulf of Oman, the Gulf of Aden, sorry. And here you have the Red Sea, you have Massawa, Sab, you have the strait down here of Bab el-Mandeb, which is quite famous in recent times, and Port Sudan up here, which was controlled by the British. And also other submarines like the Macaulay, who will travel northwards, and especially the Macaulay will be quite unlucky, since the Macaulay was lost after 5 days after the entry into war, and it ran aground on a shoal, not marked on the maps. And the Macaulay, but also other submarines, had problems with the leaks of methyl chloride. I think this is the English name. It essentially is a refrigeration gas used for the refrigeration system inside the submarine. Sorry, the climate conditioners inside the submarines, because the submarines operating in the Red Sea were exposed to extreme temperatures, way higher than in the Mediterranean. So you had to equip the submarines with climate conditioning, and this gas was necessary to make the system work. However, often there were some leaks due to mechanical issues or untrained personnel that created some problems during the maintenance work of this system. And this gas basically could poison the crew. And the first sign of poisoning was essentially that you became mad. To put it simply, you lose your reason, you lose your reason, and you eventually become crazy. There are interesting stories and terrifying stories about the people getting mad inside the submarines, while you have a smaller and smaller portion of the crew which is sane, and the rest are going crazy. So the Macalais suffered this issue. The crew went aground on this shoal, and they managed to survive there for I think about 10 days. One of them managed to reach the shore on a small boat and called for help, and eventually they were rescued by the Italians. And only one of them died and was buried in this shoal that housed the crew for some days. Then the Perla, another famous submarine that also had a similar issue to the Macalais. You have the crew going crazy. You have the submarine running aground, but closer to Eritrea. When the crew was abandoning the ship, a British destroyer, I think more than a British destroyer, showed up, and the crew was essentially helpless. They fired back with the deck gun, and then at the very last moment, some bombers came from the mainland and managed to repel the attack of the British ships. And so the Perla was saved. It was towed back in Massawa, and it will become the protagonist of a great escape that I will mention later. The Galilei was captured and after sinking a tanker. The Galvani also was lost after less than 10 days. In the Galvani, you have this gallant action by one of the sailors, Pietro Venuti, who during one of the phases of the sinking, there was a hole in the hull that was flooding the compartment where Pietro Venuti was stationed. Pietro Venuti essentially sealed the compartment behind him with him trapped inside, and he sacrificed himself, but his action basically allowed for a good chunk of the crew to survive and then come outside the submarine. And then you have the Torricelli, who was caught in an ambush by 2 gunboats and 3 destroyers. And essentially, the Torricelli fought this 40-minute long surface action with the deck gun against this British formation. And it managed to score a hit on a British destroyer, which I think it was the Khartoum, but I might be wrong. And then essentially this shell created some damage, and later after the battle there was an external explosion of the torpedo warheads, and this explosion caused the sinking of the ship. So there was a victim of the Torricelli after the battle, let's say. The crew was saved, and also the commander Pelosi was rescued by the crew. He wanted to die with the ship, but he was rescued later by the crew. And actually, there are 2 ships in the nowadays Italian Navy that are named after Pietro Venuti and Commander Pelosi. So this leaves us with the other submarines that continue their operations in the Red Sea, although the British convoys were quietly heavily escorted, and they didn't manage to score great successes. When the time came for the general collapse of Italian East Africa, the Italian Navy High Command decided to try to save these boats and ship, also the surface ships like the Eritrea and the auxiliary cruisers that were there, and to order them to reach friendly ports. So for the auxiliary cruisers and Eritrea, they were ordered to reach Japan. The submarines were ordered to reach the German-occupied France, and in particular the base in Bordeaux. The 3 submarines were quite fine with carrying out this mission because they were ocean-going submarines. But the Perla, the submarine on the left, she was a coastal submarine. So this voyage around Africa was quite a big endeavor for such a small submarine. But eventually they pulled off this mission and they reached Bordeaux. In fact, these 2 pictures represent the Perla on the left and I think the Guglielmotti or the Archimede, I don't remember which one, entering Bordeaux. And the Perla will return to the Mediterranean, and the other submarines will remain in Bordeaux and fight in the Battle of the Atlantic. And I talked about these submarines in the video I did about Beta, Somme, and the Italian submarines in the Battle of the Atlantic. So okay, this closes the focus on the submarines. There could be more stories to tell, but I'm planning to do something about the operations in the Red Sea, because are quite interesting. And remember that although the naval threat posed by the submarines and the surface ships there was not huge, the British still had to devote warships to escort the convoys. And another important aspect was that the Americans, who were still bound to the Neutrality Act, could not sail their merchant ships there in the Red Sea, because the Red Sea was a war zone. And until Eritrea and the whole Italian East Africa was occupied by the British, American merchant ships could not enter the Red Sea. So this caused a logistics strain on the pool of available merchants that the British could rely on for the resupplying of the Middle East. Okay, we move on. Last month, I watched a very interesting presentation of the Austro-Hungarian Navy during World War I. It was on the Western Association channel. What is your opinion about this topic? Great channel. I watched some episodes and conferences there. It's a great channel about World War I. What do you think about the Austro-Hungarian Navy? A balanced fleet trapped by geography, as I put here in this slide. So the Austro-Hungarians really started from what was a coastal navy in the 19th century and towards the end of the 19th century. But then there were a couple of admirals, especially Admiral Montecuccoli, yes, he had an Italian name, and others who sought to grow the naval potential of Austria-Hungary. And so they started to allocate more and more resources to build a new, more powerful and balanced fleet. And so you have, at the start of the Great War, you have a fleet that has a good number of pre-dreadnoughts, which have some limited use, we know, but are still capable to defend their coast and do shore bombardment, and they are still useful. They had a few number of armored cruisers. There were some pre-dreadnoughts, the Radetzky class, which were very capable for pre-dreadnoughts. Some people call them semi-dreadnought, and they were still capable ships. They had very interesting scout cruisers, the Novara, Admiral Spaun, the Heligoland, these ships, which were light cruisers, let's say, if we think about the World War II standards. Light cruisers, very fast and very fit for the kind of war that played out in the Adriatic. And then they also had the Tatra class destroyers, turbine equipped with turbine engine, so boilers boilers propelling the turbines, which were very capable, were armed. And the Tatra class were often referenced by the Italian admirals as a very capable ship and a very, very significant threat. So and then of course you had the 4 dreadnoughts of the Tegetov class, which were heavily armed. They had 12 guns, 305 millimeter. although they were a bit slower than their Italian counterparts. But essentially, this fleet, especially the battleships, were trapped by the geography. So the Adriatic is a long and narrow sea that ends with the Strait of Otranto. And the point is that Italy controlled one of the sides of the Strait of Otranto at the start of the war. But then, before the entry into war in 1915, already in October 1914, Italy occupied what remained back then of the Albanian state, which had collapsed essentially. So the Italians, still being neutral, they occupied the south of Albania, and essentially they allowed for the sealing of the Adriatic, rendering essentially the Austro-Hungarian surface fleet useless. And so you see the warfare in the Adriatic as essentially a destroyer and scouts matter, submarines, mine laying, mass boats, and these kind of actions. So although being very capable, they were trapped by their geography, also by the initial Italian moves and how then the Italians decided to conduct the war. There were some attempts to use armored cruisers in the Adriatic by the Italians, but after some tragic sinkings, the Italians decided to pull them off and still keep the battle fleet at anchor in Taranto to guard for the eventual sortie of the Austro-Hungarian Navy, which anyway was deterred by the presence of this stronger Italian formation, also backed by British and also French formations stationed in the theater. And for those of you who are interested in the Great War and the fight between the Italian Navy and the Austro-Hungarian Navy, I really recommend this book edited by Osprey that came out recently. It's a book from Enrico Cernuschi, an Italian historian that I hosted many times on the Italian channel, and he wrote this fantastic Osprey book on the Italian Adriatic fleet. So I highly recommend this. Okay, another narrow sea. So what level of naval operations, if any, did the Italian Navy undertake in the Black Sea during World War II? Okay, this is a very interesting topic because it's one of the cases, I would say it's the second at least, case in World War II when the Germans requested the Italian help. So what was the background? In December 1941, you have the German advance in overall in Russia stalling, and especially their push across southern Ukraine and Crimea stalls, and the Soviets are able to control the port of Sevastopol, and probably you can see there are some gray lines, and the last one around Sevastopol is, let's say, the redoubt where the Soviets resisted for several months after the occupation of Crimea by the Germans. The point is, the Axis didn't have any consistent naval forces in the Black Sea. The Germans had none. The Bulgarian and Romanian Navy were too weak, and the Soviets had their Black Sea fleet. And despite the air power that the Germans deployed there, the Germans were still not able to stop the flow of supplies and reinforcement that came to Sevastopol by the sea, coming from mainland Russia. So this was a problem for the Germans, who at the time had stopped their advance, and so they were gathering their forces for their final onslaught on Sevastopol. So in January, the Grand Admiral Raeder requests to Admiral Riccardi the Italian help. Why? Because the Italians had several small crafts like the mass boats that we talked in a previous quarterdeck episode. They also had the assault crafts that they were recently used against the British with success, because remember, we are in January 1942. In December, there was the Alexandria raid. So the Germans were impressed by the accomplishments of these units, of these crafts. So they requested the Italian help, and the Italian accepted. And in April, they started to transfer these units essentially by road, by rail, and by sea in the last segment. And between May and June, their operation started. Actually, they were deployed in Yalta. You see Sevastopol on the left, but then on the opposite side, on the right, you have Yalta. So the city famous for hosting the famous conference at the end of the war. So the Italians were based essentially there in Yalta, and from there they could hit the Soviet traffic bound for Sevastopol. What was dispatched? So here you have the list: 6 midget submarines of the CB type, the one you saw in the previous image. Then 4 mass boats, the classical mass boats, and then assault crafts, 5 MTMs. The MTMs were I have the picture here, the explosive motorboats that were used, the one up on the left, the explosive motorboats that were used, for instance, against Suda Bay for the sinking of HMS York. And then 5 MTSM, which was an enlarged version of the MTM that carried 1 torpedo. Essentially, you see at the stern there is a round hole around the hatch that was opened, and it could release a small torpedo. So this was the torpedo launching version of the MTM, let's say. Then it's really interesting how the Italians arranged the transport, because here you see a picture of the mass boats being transported by road. They made part of the voyage by road and another part of the voyage by rail. They reached the port of Costanza in Romania, and then they were moved to Yalta on the sea, so on their own means. The same for the midget submarines. Here you see this train carrying the components of the midget submarines that were partly dismantled, put on the carriages, and then transported to Romania, and then moved by sea to Yalta. In this picture, you have, I believe, one of the MTMs, because it's smaller in size. And so it's very interesting from a logistical point of view how you manage to move these boats, these crafts, by almost 1,000 kilometers, I would say. These are pictures of the CB midget submarines that are put in the sea. As you see, they're hoisted and then put it back on the sea. And these are the mass boats that were stationed there. Again, the MTMs. And what about their actions? Essentially, they saw almost a month of operations against the Soviet shipping there. Also suffered some losses, like a mass boat and one of the CBs were destroyed in port by Soviet raid. But the CBs scored 2 successes. They sunk 2 Soviet submarines that were used on the route to Sevastopol. And I think also some merchant ships and gunboat were hit. But so they posed a threat that the Soviets had to deal with by deploying more assets, but also by jeopardizing their shipping schedule to Sevastopol. And then you see in the right picture, you see the CBs, the 4 of them actually, and this picture was taken in the port of Sevastopol after it was occupied by the Germans in June 1942. After the final assault led to the capture of the city. These boats remained in the area until 1943. And in 1943, there was another success scored. Another Soviet submarine was hit by the Seabees. And essentially, 1943, apart from this success, was quite calm. The armistice came. The few personnel stationed there in the Black Sea operating the Seabees were, let's say, forced to remain there and continue the war on the side of the Germans. Although at some point the Italians felt a bit betrayed by the Germans, and then they managed to secure a deal with the Romanian Navy to transfer these Seabees to the Romanian Navy. So very interesting how the things played out in this remote theater back then after the Italian armistice. Okay, how can you describe the Regia Marina involvement in the Chinese Boxer Rebellion and how the outcome of these events affected Italian naval policy in the Far East? Okay, so the Regia Marina actually was the first armed force to intervene on the side of the Italians because, of course, you have this rebellion erupting in Beijing, and then you have the famous siege against the neighborhood where all the foreign embassies, the European presence was housed in Beijing. And the Regia Marina had some ships deployed in the area as part of let's say, the Far East squadron that was patrolling the area. And the Vettor Pisani was an armored cruiser that became the flagship of the formation, also made up by the protected cruisers Elba and Ettore Fieramosca. And actually, the sailors from these ships, so the landing parties of these ships, joined the first fights. The sailors from the Vettor Pisani, led by Federico Tommaso Paolini, reached the delegation, the Beijing and the neighborhood where the Europeans were sieged, and they took part in the defense of the neighborhood. And then you have another interesting story from Angelo Olivieri, who was an officer embarked on the Elba, and he, with 30 French sailors and 13 Italian sailors, they defended for 2 months the Beitang Cathedral, which was not far from the European neighborhood in Beijing, and they defended this cathedral for 2 months against the onslaught of the Boxers. And these 2 officers received the gold medal for military valor for their achievements in the repression of the Boxer Rebellion. So then you have army regiments coming later, but when the things are already settled, let's say. So the Regia Marina was the armed force that actually fought in the Boxer Rebellion the most, from the side of the Italians, of course. And then the major consequence was that Italy acquired the concession in Tientsin, so another neighborhood where they could carry on trade and do what they wanted. And this remained in the Italian hands until 1943, when the Japanese eventually occupied the Italian concession after Italy signed the armistice with the Allies. In general, the Regia Marina was patrolling the Far East waters, and after they got the concession in Tientsin, they patrolled more these waters with regular cruise of ships in these waters up until the period immediately before the start of the war. Are there any Italian World War II wrecks able to scuba dive, necessarily being able to enter them, but at least to see them? Okay, I'm not a professional diver, so I'm really interested in wrecks. I mean, they're certainly fascinating thing. I had the chance to meet a guy from a scuba diving association that is tasked with mapping and documenting World War II era wrecks in the Mediterranean, especially the wrecks of the Battle of the Convoys. And the wreck you see here is the wreck of the torpedo boat Lupo. The Lupo, if you remember, was the same torpedo boat that participated in the Battle of Crete on the side of the Italians and defended from a larger British formation at night that tried to attack a convoy bound for Crete. So the Lupo eventually sunk in central Mediterranean and in part of one of the escort missions during the Battle of the Convoys. And this scuba diving association managed to dive on the wreck and make some very nice pictures. I forgot one thing. If you remember, the commander of the torpedo boat Lupo at the time of the Battle of Crete was Francesco Mimbelli. Francesco Mimbelli was the same commander that was put at the head of the Italian naval forces in the Black Sea when they were deployed in 1942. So again, Francesco Mimbelli coming back across our quarterdeck live shows. These are other pictures that they made on, these are merchant ships, where it's fantastic because they managed to enter the wrecks and take pictures of guns, tanks, also tractors, camions, trucks, barrels of fuels. Fantastic. And for those of you who are interested, you can see actually this picture. I put here the website. It's underwaterhistory.org. That's the English version. And you can basically see the 3D model of the wrecks that they had managed to map, and also see the picture that they took inside the wreck. So I really recommend it. As a nation with a number of potential threats on both land and sea, how did Italy decide how to allocate its budget between three services? Very, very interesting question, because for Italy, you can make a similar argument as for France, being a country that has to choose between defense on land and sea. The thing is, France was historically a much more was a much more continental country, which still retains some very decent naval forces, which also tried to challenge the British supremacy at sea. Great Britain, we know it, is a maritime nation, an island nation, so this allowed them to focus on the navy. For Italy, we are, let's say, in the middle between France and the Great Britain. Of course, Italy is not an island, although it's defended by the Alps on the northern frontiers. It has 8,000 kilometers of coasts, and it lays in the middle of the Mediterranean. So it was natural for Italy to become a maritime nation and also develop strong military navies. I'm talking about also prior to the unification, but also merchant navies. How this continued in the post-unification period with the first, we saw it before, the first nucleus of the Italian Navy was put together by merging the navies of the pre-unification states, so mainly the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, the Kingdom of Sardinia Piedmont, and some ships from Tuscany and the Papal State. But then after the unification, Italy invested more and more in the Navy, in a larger share than the Kingdom of Sardinia was doing before. And this continued throughout the 19th century and early 20th century. Regarding the period before World War II, I managed to find this interesting table. Sadly, it only covers the period from 1926 to 1934. It was the only table that I found that summarizes the allocation over the three services. So you have the army receiving, let's say, maximum 60, minimum 54% of the budget. Then you have the Air Force on the right. So the Army is the one circled in green. The Navy is in the middle, circled in light blue, and then the Air Force is circled in red. So the Navy, you have 25, then growing up until 30% toward the mid 1930s. The Air Force stays on the average of 14-15% of the resources allocated. So you see the Navy and the Air Force managed to bite some pieces of the budget from the Army, which retained the lion's share, of course. Although you see the Navy in the late 20s and early 30s getting more funds, because these are the years when the bulk of the heavy cruisers, the light cruisers are built. Especially in 1933-34, we have the budget allocated for the first two littorials. Probably if this table continued until the late 1930s, we would see another spike in the spending for the Navy with the 1938 program, which financed the construction of two additional littorials, the Capitani Romani class, other ocean-going submarines. So I will try to find another table covering this period, but anyway, as a general trend, you have the Army retaining the lion's share, the Navy buys more and more, and you have the Air Force being third, essentially. The thing is, from a maritime nation, it would have been probably important to devote more budget to the Navy, but we know, I stressed this several times, Italy was very the least of the great powers in this period. Nowadays we think of Italy as a country similar to France, Britain, so in the same league, let's say, but at the time it was absolutely not like that. Italy was the least of the great powers, with lots of people occupied in agriculture, with a weaker industrial base. So the industrial effort was huge and probably was pushed to the limit and could not go further. What kind of amphibious capabilities did the Regia Marina have, and how successful were with naval invasions? Was the San Marco Regiment Italy's only marine force? Okay, if you remember the video about the non-invasion of Malta in 1940, I covered already some aspects there, but how to put it simply, the Regia Marina thought about amphibious operations, and in fact they had some purpose-built ships, the Adige, the Tirso, and others like this in the picture. There were 5 in total that were built in the 1930s, and you see they are, as in this picture, ships that could be beached, and they could put down their what's the English for now? I don't know, the ramp. Sorry, the forward ramp to enable the disembarking of men and vehicles, and also tractors and artillery pieces and so on. The thing is, Italy conceived this amphibious force, this naval formation of ships, as sufficient to land the full San Marco Regiment. So some battalions of the San Marco Regiment with supplies and maybe some tankettes. And this is actually coherent with what was happening all around the world, as I also explained in the Malta-related video. By the mid-1930s, early World War II, no great power is really able to land huge amount of troops. Think about the British in Norway. They had amphibious craft, landing crafts, that they were able to land some brigades. Same goes for the French, that actually used the British crafts, if I remember correctly. The Americans were still not there, were still developing the Higgins boat, which was an imitation of the Daihatsu developed by the Japanese. The Japanese were those who had a more refined amphibious doctrine, let's say, and they had more landing crafts. But again, landing huge amount of troops was not really in their capabilities. Yeah, they could land a few thousand people, like they did at Wake Island, but mounting large amphibious invasions was something that nobody could do, and only the Allies, with their immense industrial base, could mount in mid 1943. So quite in a later stage of the war, let's say. So what Italy was doing was quite coherent with what was done everywhere else. And remember, everybody had the ghost of Gallipoli, how this amphibious invasion failed miserably, because also landing in areas under the enemy's gun fire is really inconvenient, and it was a tough thing to put in place. And remember that nobody think about the Americans. The Americans in 1942, they were able to land only not even an entire division in Guadalcanal. So even the Americans were, with their industrial might, were still not there. And you will start see big invasions also in the Pacific in mid 1943. So Italy was capable of landing a few thousand troops at maximum with using these amphibious ships, and for sure the full force of the San Marco battalion, which once was mobilized, yeah, they could rely on at least three battalions plus supplies. At the start of World War II, there was the Bari division, an infantry division of the army that was meant to train for amphibious operations. And actually, they were supposed to land in Corfu at the time of the Italian invasion in Greece, invasion of Greece. But then the invasion was cancelled for the bad weather. The Italians actually will continue to develop their amphibious capabilities, especially for the planning for Operation C3. So the invasion of Malta that was supposed to take place for 1942. And here are some pictures of the Italians training how to disembark L3 tankettes from the amphibious ships I mentioned before. Then you had the emergency crafts, so the bragozzi. These were large wooden fishing boats used in the Adriatic that were seen as the auxiliary means that could be used in amphibious operations, that could be easily beached and could carry maximum 90 people, more or less. In fact, they were used, and they were also planned to be used for the invasion of Malta. And then here's another interesting picture. You have these are, I think, the infantrymen from the Livorno division, a division that will end up fighting in Sicily. And these are troops training for the invasion of Malta, disembarking from the bragozzi. And then don't remember something that I mentioned to you in a previous QUARTERDECK live, the experience in the Dodecanese and in Crete. Remember that the Italians recaptured the island of Castellorizo that was that was captured by British commandos. In a short time, they managed to mount a counterattack and land troops there in Castellorizzo and expel the British. This experience led the Italians to really develop, let's say, a task force there in the Dodecanese, able to intervene in case the British attempted to launch other raids similar to that in Castellorizzo. And so you come to Crete, to the Battle of Crete, when the Germans ask for the Italian help in to turn the tide of the battle in a moment when the Germans were not certain at all that they were able to win the battle. So you have the Germans requesting the Italians to land in eastern Crete to relieve the pressure from the German. And so the Italians, in a very short time frame, really 3-4 days, they launched this invasion from the Dodecanese against eastern Crete, and they land tankettes, they land a regiment, an infantry regiment, and some hundreds sailors from the landing parties of the warships involved. So the Italians were able to launch small-scale amphibious operations. Later in the war, they will also occupy Corsica from Vichy France. So the capability was there, but certainly not at the level of the Allies, with massive operations like Husky and later, of course, Normandy. These are lifeboats equipped for amphibious assaults, and you see these are the trench shields from the Great War that are placed on the sides. So you have to deal with what you have, essentially. And this is a picture, if I remember correctly, of Semoventi landing. I don't remember if this is captured in Tunisia or in Corsica in 1942. So there were transport crafts able to carry on tanks where they were needed. And here is since the question asked for the San Marco in particular, yes, the San Marco was the elite units capable of doing this, but remember that the landing parties of the warships were also capable of doing that. And also you had some infantry regiments like the Bari, later the Regina division, but also as we see in the preparation for Operation C3, the Livorno divisions, that they received amphibious, the training for amphibious operations. And then how can I forget the Motozattere, so the MZ, I don't remember the German name. These were German design crafts that were also replicated by the Italians and built for the invasion of Malta, but then they were never used for the invasion of Malta, and they were used to move men and supplies along the Libyan coast. Did the Regia Marina have any interest in trading technology with Japan the same way the Germans did? I could see the IGN night optics being very useful for the Regia Marina. What other technology could have been useful for either navy? Okay, essentially the answer is no. There was no relevant attempts at trading technology. There were some exchanges before the war. For instance, thank you, Marine Fair Fram. I didn't remember the German name. In the meantime, another hi to all the people connected. And the exchanges between the Germans and the Italians before the war, for instance, the Italians exported some BR-20 bombers, but then the Japanese used them in action. They were not really satisfied, and they relegated them to transport duties. During the war, there was no major exchange of technology and materials. apart from the, but this is a different story, the operations in employing the Italian submarines that I talked about in the video about the missions to the Far East. What technology could have been useful? Maybe I'm thinking about the torpedoes, the long lances, because the long lances were, of course, very dangerous weapons that did not leave a trail of bubbles behind them, so they were hardly spottable. This is because they used a propulsion not using the heated air, but pure oxygens. Pure oxygen was used to propel the torpedo, and this left no trail, no bubbles, so they were invisible. One of the problems of the Italian torpedoes was that being propelled by compressed heated air, so the heated air enabled the propulsion of the torpedo. This generated bubbles that could be spotted, and then it was easier to make evasive maneuvers against Italian launched torpedoes. And the fuse of the long lances was a contact fuse, not a magnetic fuse. So the Italians had mostly contact fuses. Apart from that, yes, the night optics could have been useful, but for the night fight, the Italians saw the night fight as something that you could use only torpedo boats, mass boats, destroyers at maximum, but essentially by using torpedoes. Gunfire was really not the best way, because the flashes of the guns could be seen, so the Italians preferred to use the torpedoes. Yes, the Italian night doctrine was night fight doctrine was not very advanced as that of the Japanese or that of the British. But this is something I should cover in a future video, the Italian night fight doctrine. So did the Regia Marina develop ideas, plans, and doctrine to deploy the main fleet into the Atlantic Ocean? During the war in the Pacific, a lot of support vessels were used to refuel captured ships at sea. I wonder if the Italian Navy was optimized for operation in the Mediterranean. Yes, the Italian Navy was optimized for operations in the Mediterranean, although, sorry, I wanted to add a slide here, but eventually I forgot to add it here. What I wanted to say is that the Italians at some point in the 1930s, in 1936, they prepared a plan for building in the course of the late 1930s and 1940s what was called the breakout fleet. So a fleet able to operate on the oceans. This fleet included more than 8 battleships and 3 aircraft carriers, and a good chunk of ocean-going scouts, which will end up being the Capitani Romani class. The thing is, this plan never came to be because it was way too ambitious, and although the Italians didn't, the Italian Navy still wanted to develop the aircraft carrier, but it was hard to develop the aircraft carrier in Italy for many reasons. I don't want to cover this topic again, but after this plan was devised, in 1939 there was a plan that was, of course, remain on the drawing boards for building not an oceanic fleet, but to operate a small nucleus of cruisers that were meant to operate in the Indian Ocean, stationed in Italian Somaliland. The cruisers designed for this purpose were essentially the successors of the Duca degli Abruzzi class, so the Duca degli Abruzzi and Garibaldi, but eventually this plan never came to be. Fleet tankers, all these kind of logistic vessels Don't remember any plans for them, and for sure the Italians were not able to do refueling at sea as the Americans and the Japanese were able to do. Of course, the needs and requirements for the Mediterranean, for a navy that was meant to operate mainly in the Mediterranean, were different from an ocean-going navy. Although, if the war did not erupt, probably the Italians would have developed a capability to operate in the Indian Ocean from the Italian East Africa. Okay, this other question, I'm sorry, I couldn't find enough time to devote to this research. I mean, I started, but I like to do proper things, put things in a proper way. So I was not really satisfied with what I managed to put together so far. So I will answer this question, which very interesting, in the next Q&A QUARTERDECK show, because essentially, who had the best AA system between Bismarck and Vittorio Veneto? This is very interesting, but I still want to do some more research to give you a more refined answer, let's say. Not definitive, but more comprehensive answer. What if any World War II vessels survived post-war? So if I got the question right, actually many vessels from the World War II survived the war. For instance, all the battleships beside Roma that was sunk, and Cavour that was refloated after Taranto, but then it was sunk in harbor in Trieste after an Allied bombing. All the other warships, all the other battleships were still afloat, and they were most of them were scrapped. But Duilio and Doria served in the post-war Italian Navy. All the cruisers that were still afloat, like the Garibaldi, Duca degli Abruzzi, all the Montecuccoli and Duca d'Aostas, except for the Muzio Attendolo that was sunk. The destroyer force, also some destroyers were still afloat, as well torpedo boats and corvettes were still afloat. And essentially, if you take out the vessels that were given to France, to the Soviet Union, or to Greece as part of the war reparations, all the others remained in service in the Italian Navy after World War II. The Marina Militare, as we call it. We have the Regia Marina for the monarchy period, and then you have the Marina Militare for the Republican period. Then this initial for 1945 was also complemented by American ships that were handed over to Italy in the 1950s. The mass boats as well, and yeah, that's it. Sadly, no vessels were preserved as museum ships, because I mean, in Europe there is a tendency to not do museum ships. There are some, but very few of them. And in Italy, you only have submarines devoted, transformed, into museum ships, and a few. There is a torpedo boat somewhere. So that comes to my mind. Yeah. I added some pictures, like you have left, upper left corner, you have the D'Arecco. The D'Arecco was the only destroyer of the Navigatori class that survived the war and managed to serve in the Marina Militare. And then you have two Capitani Romani class cruisers. One was an incomplete hull that were later transformed into destroyers, and you see they mounted the American-built 5-inch guns. And then you have the Garibaldi that underwent a famous and radical reconstruction, and basically it became the first European guided missile cruiser. in the 1960s. Did the post-war Navy clear the minefields, or what was done by the Allies? It was done by the Italians using their vessels, but also some other vessels that were handed over by the Allies. So you have the Anemone in the lower right corner, was a minesweeper, I think a British-built minesweeper that was handed over to the Italians, as well as other sister ships. Then you have the Dino and other ships that were originally Germans and then they were transferred to Italy to help with the minesweeping duties. And also corvettes like the Ape, and also older torpedo boats that were destroyers from the Great War that were used as minesweepers to clear all the coastal areas, and also the northern the harbors in northern Italy that were mined by the Germans during their retreat from Italy. Okay, list of good museums for naval history in Italy. Okay, we have some great ones. This one in the picture is the museum in La Spezia. I see Bob is in the chat and he can testify that the museum in La Spezia is great. For instance, in La Spezia, you can find one of the MTSM, one of these assault crafts that were deployed in the Black Sea. And this picture is fantastic because you see how the torpedo was released from the boat, from this round hatch at the stern of the boat. And then you have, for instance, the Mignata, which is a very unique piece, is the one of the very first Italian assault crafts, the ancestor of the human torpedo. And these two units were built, and the other one was used to sink the Austro-Hungarian battleship Viribus Unitis in Pula. And then you have the one of the propellers of the Vittorio Veneto, the battleship. And then you have, for instance, a very nice room hosting a lot of figureheads of famous ships in Italian history. This particular one is the figurehead of the Cristoforo Colombo, the training ship, the sister ship of the nowadays Amerigo Vespucci, that was sadly given to the Soviets as part of the war reparations and was lost in the 1950s. But the Italians, before handing over the ship to the Soviets, took out the figurehead and they put it here in the museum. Then another one in Genoa, it's called Galata Museo del Mare, so Museum of the Sea. It's contrary to the Museum in La Spezia. The Museum in La Spezia is focusing on the Italian Navy. The museum in Genova is more comprehensive, let's say. It embraces the whole, let's say, human history, and you have a replica of a 16th century galley, and a lot of models and pieces of history. And most importantly, you have the Sauro, submarine from the 1980s that was preserved, and you can actually visit the Sauro and go through it. It's a very nice and well preserved boat. And actually, I managed to visit this boat with my friend Rahinifel when we had the tour in Italy in October 2024. It was a very nice experience. Venice, then also another museum that I visited with Rahinifel, and there you have another submarine that you can visit, the Enrico Dandolo, still a submarine from the Cold War, from the previous generation. It's way smaller than the Sauro. Then you have human torpedoes from World War II. You have pieces of Venetian history, and then you have a piece of the stern section of the battleship Wien, one of the Austro-Hungarian battleships, coastal battleships that was sunk in Trieste from the action of Italian mass boats that sneaked into the port and torpedoed the battleship. So these three museums are my top pick. There are some other smaller museums, but these are the three big ones. Okay, Bob is testifying that these museums are really good. Okay, this other question is about the typical firearms issued to the personnel of the Italian Navy. I have a very good book recently published by the Italian Navy Historical Office, which it's only in Italian, sadly, but it's only about personal equipment in the Regia Marina, and essentially I put together some pictures from this book and regarding firearms, light weapons. The Italians were given the Modello 91, so the standard Italian rifle. The Modello 91/38 is the one in the lower picture. That was let's say the modern version of this rifle that was also given to the Italian Army. The Italian Navy also utilized the upper gun, which is the Modello 91 TS, where TS stands for Special Troops. It was a shorter version of the gun that was also used by the Italian sailors. And talking about pistols, you have the classic Beretta in use in the Italian Armed Forces that was also used by the Regia Marina. There were, of course, the same light machine guns used by the Italian Army, like the Breda 30, Breda 37, were also given to the landing parties that each ship could assemble. And then, speaking of SMGs, you have the MAP 38, another quite famous submachine gun that was also present in the inventory of the Italian Navy, especially to the elite units of the San Marco. For instance, the standard San Marco Marine was given the Modello 91 rifle, but special corps like those meant to carry out like commando style operations, usually they were given the MAP 38, which, as you know, it was an excellent submachine gun. And I think that this one we conclude the first segment, the main segment of this live show. Let's see if you have a few questions that I can answer live. Okay, I wonder if things would have turned out a little differently if Italian warships were equipped with German ready in 1940 rather than waiting until 1942. Yes, this is one of the big what ifs of the history of the Italian Navy. Sorry, I disappeared for a second. This is one of the big what ifs of the history of the Italian Navy. Yes, it would have not changed the war, because you have to see how many vessels are you able to equip with radar. I mean, if you take the German Navy, you find radar sets on capital ships, but as far as I know, not on many destroyers. So on this, having enough radars on destroyers, it would have made a difference, probably in the Battle of the Convoys. On battleship, probably for detecting air threats. I mean, as Bob said in the chat, this could have prevented Matapan. Yes, probably if the radar set were given to these specific cruisers. Yes, but yeah, in general, having the radar would have not changed the war. Having radar in huge amount, also on destroyers and all the cruisers, would have improved certainly the defense capabilities in the Battle of the Convoys and in some surface actions. But yeah, and if you remember, in one of the previous Q&A live shows, I talked about the development of Italian radar, how it did not end up well. Okay, I asked the budget question. You went over earlier. Was the budget decided on more by strategy, or was it? But yeah, it was a political battle, I would say, because bear in mind, you had Mussolini wanted to divide and rule always. Saying that Mussolini has a clear strategy, it's false. So he was, and also remember that he was not really into military technology. He was different to Hitler. Hitler was more interested and more, let's say, knowledgeable about military technology than Mussolini was. But aside of that, the strategy of what was needed by the armed forces was decided on the armed force level. So the Navy decided what they needed, the Army decided what they needed, and so did the Air Force. Then it was up to them to win for the political battle for the budget. And for instance, in the race for building battleships, and at the end of the 1930s, the Ethiopian crisis and the threat posed by the Royal Navy. Let's say if the Royal Navy opposed the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, they could have cut the Italian supply lines, and Italy would have never invaded Ethiopia. But then the British didn't go forward, and but the Italians were very scared by the possible intervention. And at the time, remember that there were no capital ships available beside the two Duilios, but still in World War I configuration. So this really reinforced the idea of the fact that Italy needed a strong force of battleship capable to at least deter any foreign intervention in the Mediterranean. So this proved the political leverage, let's say, to build more battleships and get the funding for the very ambitious 1938 program, which is something I cover in the video about the unfinished battleship Impero. Okay, when we'll get our bookshelf tour. Okay, so you mean my bookshelf tour? Okay, yeah, probably if you're interested. The fact is, 90%, 99% of these books are in Italian. The books that I recommend about the Italian Navy in the English language are already mentioned in the video I made on the book reviews. So I really recommend to watch this video. Also add the World War I related book I mentioned before by Osprey. And but yeah, let me know if you are interested in the ship models tour here. I can tell you that I managed to get my hands on what I could find. Sadly, I only have one Italian model here. It's the Roma. These ships here are British, Japanese, German, some Americans, and that's it. And down here, I also have Italian aircraft models. Let's see for other questions. Okay, question from Bob, which is the first most loyal member, because he was the first member of the channel. So thank you, Bob, for all your support. This might be not an easy question. Was the Regia Maria more prepared for the Great War or for the Second World War? Huh. Very tough question. I mean, it's these are two different wars. Hardly comparable. I mean, I said many times that Italy was, especially the Italian Navy, was not prepared for the Second World War, especially on the level of escort ships. The war erupted at a point when the plans for the reinforcement of the fleet were still undergoing. So if the Regia Marina was able to deploy a relevant deterrent consisting of the three Littorios, I mean, two at the start of the war, and then also the rebuilt battleship helped to create this deterrent. In the Battle of the Convoys, already from 1941, you start seeing reports where the admirals say, we don't have enough destroyers because we need them for escort duties and we cannot assign them to the battle fleet. And then you will have the torpedo boats also requested for escort duties, and then you cannot assign the torpedo boats to guard the Sicilian Channel. So Italy really needed to build more of them, but the war started earlier than expected, and then this was one of the things that caught the Regia Marina unprepared, although they were still able to carry on the Battle of the Convoys until the very end. But then you have to consider that in the Great War, you were allied with all major maritime powers. In the Second World War, you were not. And so you had to deal with the shortage of fuel. You had to deal with the closure of the Mediterranean. So it's a very, very hard question to answer. But I hope I provided some elements to reflect about it. Okay, what ship is the one with sails on the top shelf? Okay, so this one here is the Lego Endurance model, or Endurance, probably it's said in English. It's the famous ship used by the British explorer Shackleton for the expedition in Antarctica. So Lego put together this amazing set, and I couldn't resist this amazing sailing ship. The other one here, it's an actually wooden model that was done by my grandfather. It's a pirate ship. I don't think it's necessarily an historical ship, but it's a very nice model and has a very strong family connection. Could Italy have maintained its neutral status, or would Italy be as much danger of German invasion as anyone else? I don't think that Germany would have attempted to invade Italy, especially for the terrain, but also because it was not in the, at least the short and midterm objectives of Nazi Germany. I mean, who can tell if in a dystopic scenario Germany wins over the Soviet Union, Italy is still neutral and they decided to invade? I don't know. Could have Italy maintained its neutral status? This is more a tricky question, because as I partly explained in the video where I read the Admiral Bernotti's memoir. Sorry. Remember that Italy, during the period of the neutrality between September 1939, June 1940, Italy was relying on the sea shipment of coal from Germany. So Germany was shipping this coal through the Netherlands, and then this coal was reaching Italy by sea. The British didn't like this, of course, and they started to curtail this trade. So Italy found itself in a very tricky position where they couldn't import their main source of energy. The situation changed in March when the Germans, with a huge effort, managed to provide the same amount of coal by rail. So you understand that the Germans have bought the Italians in a way. So the remaining neutral was quite tough from simply an energy security level. I mean, probably the Germans could have had an interest in maintaining in Italy neutral, so that Italy could carry out, let's say, a contraband trade with nations outside the Mediterranean, and then also move these goods to Germany, and so evade the British blockade. But at some point, the British would have understood this, and this would have ended. So I hope I've answered your question, which is a great question and also a tricky one. Okay. Wrong, but Sardinia wasn't that particular strong navy. Were there any Italian states that the Regia looked for traditions? No, actually, with the Kingdom of Sardinia and Piedmont, I mean the state that actually carried on the unification process. No, they actually had a decent navy for the Italian standards at the time. Although the navy of the two Sicilies was probably a bit larger. But the Regia Marina essentially was built on the two traditions from the north and from the south. And until the 80s of the 19th century, there were still two different naval academies, one in Genoa and one in Naples. And then only later they were unified in the nowadays Academy of Livorno. So the first decades were quite hard because it was a merge of different traditions. And also remember that there were also Venetian officers joining the ranks. It took a while to build a unified armed force. But by the end of the 19th century, this was already solidified, I would say. It's not a question for this evening, I guess, but is the chance of seeing a video about Italian naval exports during the interwars years in the future? Yes, because I managed to get the source, a great book that was written by Erminio Bagnasco, an author that I mentioned in the past. It's the guy who wrote the book on the Littorio class battleships, which is also available in English. And all the heavy cruiser book that was published by Seafort in English. So Erminio Bagnasco wrote this short book. It's, I think, 100 pages about Italian naval exports from the 19th century to the interwar period. So it's very interesting, and I will talk about this in a future video. I mean, not a lot of modern powers exported full-size cruiser. Interesting and not well known to me. Yes, absolutely. I will cover this. And remember that, for instance, an Italian ship participated in the Battle of Tsushima. It was a cruiser sold to the Japanese. And then, of course, you have the amazing Georgios Averov, the Pisa class armored cruiser that was sold to Greece, and Greece preserved it until today, and you can visit it as a museum ship in the Piraeus Harbor. Let's see if there are other questions, although it's quite late to say. So I think I will close it for tonight. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Remember to share the video, press like, leave a comment. If you want to support the channel, there's the membership, and you can access the video about the Impero, but this will eventually become public soon. And thank you for watching. Thank you for posting your questions, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye-bye.